Hello, I'm always so happy to have you back. So, today's topic is one that is talked about a lot with regards to autism. It could affect other neurodivergences as well, but I think it's primarily something that is tied to autism, and that is theory of mind. I'm Leah Batlle-Rafferty, and this is Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. So, what is the definition of theory of mind? According to a Psychology Today article that I will tie to in the show notes, quote, theory of mind is typically defined as the ability to understand the thoughts, beliefs, desires, and emotions of other people. This understanding allows individuals to predict how others will feel, act, and think in a given situation. End quote. But what I thought was even more interesting in this particular article is there's a term that they bring up that I had never heard before, which is mind blindness. And I quote, mind blindness is considered the absence of theory of mind. The term originated as a way to describe the delays in theory of mind development among people with autism. Individuals with mind blindness have difficulty understanding the intentions and behaviors of others. It can result in difficulty with communication and can come across as a lack of empathy, but is more accurately understood as a cognitive state where an individual assumes that others perceive situations the same way the individual does. End quote. There is more in this article about how people can learn theory of mind, but it's so much harder for people who have autism. And there is also the eye contact thing, which I'm a little baffled by. It says that people, and I quote, believe eye contact is related to infants attempting to understand the people around them. A disinterest in eye contact correlates to a reduced theory of mind. End quote. Well, of course it does. It's one of the symptoms of autism. Correlation does not mean causation, people. Let's start with that. I think you can tell I'm a little annoyed by this article, especially the definition of mind blindness and the idea that we're disinterested in understanding others. So let's get to a couple of those topics. I know tons of autistic people who are very empathetic. There's a difference between not understanding how somebody reacts to an emotion versus not understanding that somebody is having an emotion. When I was very young, I did have some issues with this. I can remember distinctly, and I don't remember what the situation was, but I remember distinctly where I was talking to another child, I think it must have been in elementary school, and I had assumed that they would react the same way to what was happening because I could tell they were feeling the same way, but they didn't. And we had a conversation about it. And I think that's where I learned that people can have similar feelings and react very differently to them. So in terms of theory of mind, the empathy part, maybe it's missing in some autistic people, maybe. But most autistic people I know are hugely empathetic. My son is the mediator in his group of friends. He's constantly stressing himself out to help out everyone around him. And he talks to me about how he can feel other people's feelings. I remember feeling that way as well. I could feel really strongly what somebody else was feeling. Nowadays, I don't know. I don't know if it's being older and masking, but I don't feel like it's quite as defined as it used to be. I went to a friend's house for gaming the other day, and I have a ton of GI issues, and she's autistic, and she presents a lot more typical than I guess I do for autism. But she realized that I would not be able to get almost anything from the food that she had set up. I brought along some of my own snacks. but she could tell I was uncomfortable in terms of not having enough to eat. And she went way out of her way to make sure that I had something nutritious to eat. So, caring, empathetic, thoughtful. There we go. Other things that annoy me is the idea that we can't be taught. Everything is a skill, people. Everything. As I've said previously, I've learned how to have conversations. I've learned how interactions with people go. I have learned so many things that other people take for granted. And just like that, I think theory of mind is very learnable. I think saying that autistic people have a lower likelihood of learning it is putting us all in one giant box when we are a spectrum, when we are a circle, when we are, however you want to term it, when we are very, very individual people with very, very differently presenting symptoms. Mind blindness. Okay, in terms of behaviors of others, I guess I would agree with that. I've mentioned, I think in the feelings episode, that I would have a hard time telling if somebody was mad at me. I could tell they were mad though. See, that's the thing. I could look at someone and see that they were really upset. And they were talking to me and they were smiling. And I didn't know if they were wearing a social mask and they were truly mad at me, or if they were smiling because they didn't want me to understand that they were upset because they weren't upset at me, and I could not tell. So behavior-wise, yes, I had a very hard time interpreting people's behavior to understand what was going on in their head. I see all the puzzle pieces though. This is not something where I go about my day and I don't notice anything. It's just I can't see how the puzzle pieces fit together necessarily, and so I need to ask explicitly instead of having some kind of innate hypothesis as to what's going on, because my innate hypothesis goes all over the place and generally starts and ends with, I did something. And this is true for a lot of autistic people, by the way. I did something. That's the central sort of feeling when you notice that somebody's upset. I think another thing that makes theory of mind as it is defined hard, not impossible, is what I talked about in the feelings episode. So if my feelings are less complex than your feelings, and somebody actually just recently, while I was having a conversation with me, said, "You act exceedingly young. Do you know that about yourself?" And I said, yes. Once again, I think it's because of the lower complexity of my feelings. I think my feelings tend to be fairly straightforward. I think I miss some subtle connotations in social cues if I haven't been in a situation before that other people pick up. And I've learned a ton from talking to a particular person about this at work. But I think the root cause of me seeming younger is that sort of one-dimensional feeling. And I think that it might also be the cause for the presumption of lack of theory of mind. If my feelings are exceedingly straightforward and I can feel part of your feelings because I'm somewhat empathetic, right? I can see that you're upset, I can see, etc. Maybe I can't interpret anything because I can't see the 10 layers of your feelings because I tend to only have one. I do very poorly with total social masks, right? I do very poorly in situations where language is used as a barrier to entry, where, like in the South, where you have a lot of words that are polite words but are really rude words, or the other way around. I have a really hard time with those sorts of nuances. I can learn them. I have learned them, but they're hard. And what that means in the end is that I have a hard time with the nuances of your emotions, simply because I can't see all the layers. So I can't create the correct hypothesis because I think of your emotions. No, that's wrong. I don't think of your emotions as being as straightforward as mine. Maybe I did when I was young, but nowadays, that's not something that I honestly believe. I know that the emotional range isn't even the word. I have a high emotional range. The emotional layers that other people have are not something that I have. So I know for a fact, I have theory of mind in that sense. I know that you are going to react differently and think differently in a situation than I will. I understand that those reactions in certain situations are really easy to capture. So this is where the masking, chameleoning templates of behavior come in. I can tell how you're going to act in certain situations because those situations are fairly constrained, like at work. I know what to do in a meeting. That's a very constrained situation. I know what my really, really, really close friends are going to be like when I'm home, and hopefully they give me a pass for a lot of my weirdness. But where it's a much more high touch point, less constraint, off the cuff sort of situation for most of my life, it was very difficult to understand what I could do or say to help the other person. And it was very difficult to understand everything another person was going through because I think I grasped only the biggest emotion showing. I'm going to talk about my little email right now, and if I've already said this in the feelings episode, I'm going to cut this part. But what I learned to do is to create polite ways to make people be more explicit about what they were thinking and feeling and what they needed out of me as the years went by. So I have a little email that I created a while back, and it took me until my 40s to do this. I wish I had learned to do it earlier. And it was this little email that I sent out, and I said, "You looked upset when I was talking to you today. I hope it wasn't because of me. If it was, I would love to find out what happened so that I can fix it. If it wasn't, I hope your day gets better." And 3/4 of the time, I got an email back saying, "Thank you for thinking of me. It definitely wasn't you, but I appreciate the email." And after a few years of doing that, my anxiety about dealing with people who were looking upset and talking to me went down a lot because I realized that 90-something% of the time they were not upset at me. It wasn't something that I could learn from their behavior, though. It had to be explicitly said to me. I learned, as I said in previous episodes, how to word it in a way that reduced tension, but allowed me to get my question out so that I could understand how to react to a situation. So I'm sort of insulted by this article saying that someone with autism doesn't understand that other people react and think differently. I think somebody with autism may very well understand that somebody behaves and reacts differently than us. But the part of theory of mind that is hypothesis generation is the part that we can't quite grasp. I am also exceedingly bothered by the idea that if we can't hold eye contact, that means that there's a disinterest in learning about people. This is so far from the truth, at least in my case, that it's not even funny. I talk to every taxi driver I'm in a car with, and every Uber driver, every Lyft driver, every whatever rideshare driver, to find out their stories and where they come from. I really love to understand people's points of view. I talk to my masseuse and ask him questions about how he heals his hands at the end of the day, or do they have insurance for hands like people who do hand modeling does. And thankfully he laughs at it and answers my questions. I am voracious in my attempts to understand other people's thoughts and where they're coming from and what experiences they've had and what their life looks like compared to mine. And I don't really look people in the eyes very much. I'm not completely obvious about it. I can hold eye contact for brief periods of time. But yeah, it's patently untrue in my mind that lack of eye contact means lack of interest in learning other people. So, for those of you recently getting diagnosed, for those of you who have a great deal of social anxiety because you have a hard time guessing, don't let that checklist item overwhelm you. Out of all of them, that item is the one that gets me every single time. It annoys me very badly because it may be true for some, but for many of us, it's not. And it's put there by people diagnosing us from the outside in. And if all you focus on is childhood, you're going to see a lot more of that, sure, of course. It takes us longer to learn it. It takes us longer to understand how to correctly interact with others so that we understand what they need and so that we can talk about what we need as separate beings. But to say we can't learn it, or that it is exceedingly difficult for us to learn, and to say that autistic people in particular cannot get there, is patently untrue. I just feel like there isn't a high volume of research and care given to what autism looks like in the later stages of life, which is part of the reason I'm doing this podcast. Because, hey, if you're in your 40s and you're in your 50s, you have probably created coping mechanisms and learned skills and done all these things that make you fit into society better. So these checklist items, they feel a little, okay, frankly, I'm going to be clear about this. They feel insulting to me. And once again, I know other people in the spectrum may have these problems, And so they need to be out there. But the way that they're listed makes it sound like every single one of us has challenges in all of these areas. And that's just not true. So I hope those of you listening who have recently been diagnosed or are looking to get diagnosed or had thought that you were different, have managed to get by, and are suddenly realizing that, wait, maybe I really, really am different. I hope that this makes you feel better about going and getting support and asking for a diagnosis if that's what you want, because those checklist items are not all you. They will never be all you. And there has to be a better way to present autism than in the manner that you see on these websites. Because honestly, I feel like I'm an okay person. I feel like I'm a pretty good friend. I feel like I do fairly well at work. You would not believe that from what you read online. And for everyone listening, it's okay to be different. Thank you for tuning in to Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. This podcast was written, edited, and produced by me, Leah Batlle-Rafferty. All music is by Carlos Neda, and this podcast is part of Labrat Solutions, Inc.